Hi everybody, and welcome back to California Native Plants and Plant Communities. You may have heard recommendations that we incorporate more California native plants into our cultivated landscapes in order to support local wildlife. Or perhaps you've been to or you work at a nursery that has a native plant section. This class is called California Native Plants, but what exactly do we mean by California native? That's what the focus of this unit is going to be. By the end of this unit, you'll be able to define native as it relates to flora and fauna in California, name the 3 floristic provinces in California, name the 5 regions of the world with a Mediterranean-type climate, define endemic, and explain what the geographic range or distribution of a plant is and know where to look up this information. So let's start by defining native. In the Americas, which includes Canada, the USA, Central and South America, a native plant or animal is one which occurred naturally in these areas prior to European contact. In California, the first recorded European contact is considered to be September 28, 1542, when the Spaniard Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, for whom our college is named, sailed into San Diego Bay. It wasn't until 1769, though, that the Spanish established the first permanent European settlement on the Pacific coast, which was the Presidio in San Diego. In its broadest terms, therefore, a California native plant is one which grew here prior to 1542. How do we define California, though? California only became recognized as a state in 1850, less than 200 years ago, which is no time at all as far as the evolution of its landscape and flora and fauna are concerned. The state borders were created by humans for geopolitical purposes and have no meaning for non-human organisms. Plants and the animals and wind that pollinate their flowers and disperse their seed and spores don't recognize geopolitical regions or borders. The pollen and seeds don't suddenly stop at the state line and go no further. Biogeography is the study of the geographic distribution of plants, animals, and other forms of life, and the factors responsible for variations in their distribution. Rather than using geopolitical regions, one of the concepts used by biogeographers worldwide to categorize plants is that of floristic provinces. A floristic province can be defined as a biogeographical area that has a relatively uniform composition of plants. The geopolitical area that we call the state of California is recognized worldwide as having 3 main floristic provinces: the California Floristic Province, the Great Basin Floristic Province, and the Desert Floristic Province, and each one of these extends beyond the state lines. In the diagram on the right, you can see the location of the 3 floristic provinces in California. Up in the top right-hand corner here is the Desert Floristic Province. This area that I'm outlining now is the Desert Floristic Province, and then the remaining, much larger area is the California Floristic Province. The smaller subdivisions that you can see in this diagram are called geographic subdivisions, and they're used in the Jepson Manual of Vascular Plants of California, and we'll talk about these in another unit. For now, let's take a closer look at the 3 floristic provinces. The Great Basin Floristic Province is the largest of the 3, covering around 209,000 square miles. But as you can see from this diagram on the right, it only extends slightly into California, covering a very small area of the state east of the Sierra Nevada. Most of the Great Basin Floristic Province is in Nevada, southeastern Oregon, Utah, and Idaho. The defining characteristics of the Great Basin Floristic Province are aridity, wide temperature ranges, and alkaline soils. Dominant plants are ones which are adapted to these conditions and include Artemisia tridentata, the big basin sagebrush, and some species of Atriplex, which is saltbush. There are around 50 species of saltbush that are native to California, and they're almost all halophytes. This means they're adapted to salty, alkaline soils. Not many species of Atriplex are seen in cultivated landscapes, but you may occasionally see one of our locally native Atriplex species, Atriplex lentiformis, or quailbush. There are some of these planted outside the Seymour Discovery Center in Santa Cruz, and you sometimes see them used in beneficial insect hedgerows around organic fields in Watsonville. Big basin sagebrush is an evergreen shrub with soft silvery foliage that you can see in the small photo on the right. It's an attractive shrub for cultivated landscapes, and there's a nice specimen in the demonstration garden at Sierra Azul Nursery in Watsonville. The Desert Floristic Province is the smallest of the 3 floristic provinces, covering around 87,700 square miles in southeastern California, Baja California, southwestern Arizona, and southern Nevada. It includes the Mojave and Sonoran deserts. You may also read that it includes the Colorado Desert, which, confusingly, is the name sometimes given to the area of the Sonoran Desert that's within California's state lines. There's a better image illustrating this on the next slide. The Desert Floristic Province is one of extremes. It includes Badwater Basin in Death Valley, which at 282 feet below sea level is the lowest point in North America, not just the US or California. The province also includes mountains with elevations of up to 11,000 feet. The summers are long and hot, and on August 16, 2020, the highest temperature ever recorded in the US was at Furnace Creek in Death Valley at 130 degrees Fahrenheit. The winters are moderate with occasional frosts, but the Mojave Desert is colder than the more southerly Sonoran Desert and has longer periods of freezing temperatures. The average annual precipitation is between just 2 to 10 inches in the valleys, but it can reach as much as 25 inches on the mountain slopes. No part of the province, though, has regular rains, and a year or even more may pass without any measurable rainfall, especially in the region's western part. The Mojave Desert receives less summer rain than the Colorado Desert, which has a more southerly location, lower elevation, and exposure to a summer monsoon rainfall pattern. Much of the plant life in the Desert Floristic Province has adaptations to both heat and extended periods of drought. Vegetation can be very sparse, especially in the Mojave Desert, with expanses of bare ground between individual plants that are competing for scarce water resources. Cacti and thorny shrubs are common, but there are also many thornless shrubs and herbaceous plants. You'll learn more about plant adaptations to heat and drought in a separate unit. Higher elevations in the Desert Floristic Province that receive more rainfall support trees such as juniper and pinyon pine. Plants you may be familiar with from the Desert Floristic Province include the Joshua tree, pictured here on the right, which is Yucca brevifolia, and you see this planted frequently as an ornamental in Santa Cruz County. Several agave species are also native to the province, and you probably heard of creosote bush, Larrea tridentata. You'll also see some species of prickly pear, including the beavertail cactus, which you can see here on the right. The vegetation of the Sonoran Desert is the most diverse of all the North American deserts. Common plants include many cacti, such as the saguaro cactus, barrel cactus, organ pipe cactus, prickly pear, and cholla, plus other plants such as ocotillo, yucca, agaves, ironwood, palo verde, elephant tree, mesquite, and creosote bush. Two of the best places to see collections of plants of the Sonoran Desert gathered together in one place are in Arizona at the Desert Botanical Garden in Phoenix and the Sonoran Desert Museum, which is just outside Tucson. Of the three floristic provinces, the California Floristic Province covers the largest area of California, covering around 70% of the state. If you look at the map here on the right, you can see that the province extends beyond state lines into the southwestern corner of Oregon, and in the south, it extends into Baja California. It also includes all of the Channel Islands off the coast of Southern California and the islands off the coast of Baja California as well, which are part of Mexico. The main characteristic of the California Floristic Province is a Mediterranean-type climate. The internationally accepted Köppen-Geiger climate classification system defines a Mediterranean-type climate as one with long, hot or warm, dry summers and cool, wet winters. Snow is rare and average annual rainfall is less than 35 inches. If you look at the map on the right and then apply your existing knowledge of weather patterns in California, you can see that there are areas of the California Floristic Province that don't meet the criteria for a Mediterranean-type climate. For example, snow is very common at higher elevations in most of the mountain ranges of California, and average annual precipitation in many areas can be a lot more than 35 inches, as you can see from the areas on this diagram that are colored in shades of darker green and blue. For this reason, there's debate in some circles that the California Floristic Province should be redefined. So, although not all parts of the California Floristic Province meet all the criteria for a Mediterranean-type climate, what is common to most of the California Floristic Province is that it has a precipitation pattern that's typical of a Mediterranean-type climate, meaning most of the rain and snow falls in the winter. This climate pattern started to develop between 7 and 4 million years ago, so California's native plant life has evolved over a long period of time with this precipitation pattern. The California Floristic Province is one of just 5 regions in the world defined as having a Mediterranean-type climate. The other 4 regions are shown on the map on the right here, and they are the Mediterranean Basin, the Cape of South Africa, the central coast of Chile, and parts of Southwest and South Australia. Plants from these regions usually perform well in many areas of California and often combine really well in ornamental landscapes with many of the California natives that have been brought into cultivation. The plants include ones that you frequently see in Greater San Francisco Bay, Central Coast, and Southern California landscapes and nurseries, such as Grevillea, leucadendrons, Protea, Banksia, Leucospermum, Kniphofia, lavender, rosemary, and cistus, to name just a few. So let's go back to the original question of how do we define a California native? I said earlier that we can define a native as a plant that was growing here before 1542. As far as the definition of California is concerned, the generally accepted definition is any plant that is native to any part of one or more of the 3 floristic provinces that's within state lines. A slightly broader definition, adopted by some people, is one which occurs in any part of the desert and Great Basin floristic provinces within state lines, plus the whole of the California Floristic Province. Defining a California native isn't quite that simple though, as you'll see in the slides that are coming up. I mentioned earlier that the definition of a floristic province is a biogeographical area that has a relatively uniform composition of plants. Clearly, though, the composition of plants in California is far from uniform. You only have to drive from, say, the coast and saltwater marsh of Elkhorn Slough at Moss Landing, go north on Highway 1, and then drive through the mixed evergreen and coast redwood forests either side of Highway 17 to see that the type and composition of plants changes quite dramatically, even within this relatively short distance. Where plants grow is determined by complex interactions between geology, which influences soils, and climate, which includes precipitation, temperature and wind, and is influenced by latitude, elevation, aspect, and proximity to large bodies of water. In California, fire also influences where plants grow. California has a diverse topography and geology, which contribute to a wide range of soils and microclimates. The area or areas within these soils and microclimates in which plants occur is referred to as their geographic range or their distribution. For example, on the right, you can see a small photo of the flowers of the California native shrub Cleveland sage, Salvia clevelandii. And the yellow and light orange shading on the map, down in the bottom left-hand corner here, shows the distribution of this shrub, which is limited to Riverside, San Diego, and Orange counties. The extent of a plant's distribution varies widely. Some plants have a very broad range or distribution that extends across continents. For example, two plants that are native to the California floristic province and are commonly used in Californian landscapes are the herbaceous perennial common yarrow, Achillea millefolium, pictured in the inset photo here, and creeping red fescue, Festuca rubra, which is a grass, and you can see that pictured here in this meadow that was created in a private garden in Soquel. Both these plants are also native to other areas of the US and to Northern Europe, and therefore we can describe these two plants as having a very broad range or distribution. Some plants have a very narrow range or distribution. An example is Pajaro manzanita, Arctostaphylos pajaroensis, pictured here on the right, and which you can see growing at Cabrillo in the median strip next to the horticulture student parking lot. This manzanita grows in the wild in only a very, very small area of northern Monterey County, around Prunedale. We can refer to this plant as being endemic to Monterey County. Endemic means it's found in the wild nowhere else in the world. In Santa Cruz County, local endemics include the silverleaf manzanita, Arctostaphylos sylvicola, and the Ben Lomond buckwheat, Eriogonum nudum variety decurrens, which both have very restricted ranges in the Santa Cruz sandhills around Bonnie Doon and Felton. So how do you figure out what the natural range or distribution of a plant is, and why would you need to know? Well, perhaps you're working with a client who only wants locally occurring natives in their landscape. So first of all, you need to find out from the client exactly what they mean by local. Do they mean local to the Monterey Bay, local to the county, or local to their neighborhood or watershed? Once you've done that, you need to figure out if the plants available through the local nurseries meet your client's definition of local. If you're buying the plants through non-specialist retail or wholesale nurseries, it's not very likely they'll be able to tell you what the distribution of a plant is, or if the plants are locally native, unless they happen to have a native plant specialist on staff. An alternative would be to buy the plants from nurseries that specialize in native plants, such as Central Coast Wilds in Santa Cruz or the Watershed Nursery in Richmond, where they'll be able to tell you what the distribution is. Specialist nurseries, such as these two, will often also be able to tell you the exact collection location of the seed or cuttings that the plants were grown from. This location is described as the plant's provenance. If you've bought the book California Native Plants for the Garden, you'll see that the listing for each plant includes its range. The description in this book is usually quite broad, though, and may not give you all of the localized detail that you need. Let's take the plant blue-eyed grass, Sisyrinchium bellum, as an example, and you can see a picture of this small herbaceous perennial on the right. And just here is a copy of part of its description in California Native Plants for the Garden. You can see from this that the plant's range is described as widespread in many plant communities below 6,000 feet throughout California to Oregon and northwestern Baja California. From that description, it sounds like the plant probably does grow natively in Santa Cruz County, but it's a little vague and we don't know for sure. For Santa Cruz County, one of the best resources for checking whether or not a plant is locally native is the second edition of the annotated checklist of the vascular plants of Santa Cruz County that was published in 2013. If you're working in other counties, you may find that there's a county flora available, like the two pictured on the right here for Napa and Marin counties. A flora is a listing of all the plants found in a particular area, together with descriptions of those plants and identification keys. Older flora usually only have line drawings of the plants, whereas more recently published ones may have photos. Other resources for looking up the range of a native plant are the websites of CalFlora, CalScape, and the eFlora of California that's available online and maintained by the Jepson Herbarium at UC Berkeley. Again, the eFlora maintained by the Jepson Herbarium may not be specific enough, but CalFlora and CalScape both have a feature called What Grows Here, where you can type in a zip code, an address, or pinpoint an area on a map, and their database throws out a list of plants that are native to that particular area. These can be really useful tools, and we'll be looking at them in more detail in some of our labs. So let's go back now to the definition of a California native plant. The California Floristic Province is a really large area, so a question that often arises is, if you're creating a native landscape, is it really native if the plants in it aren't locally native? For example, if you're creating a landscape with California natives in Santa Cruz, can you still say you're landscaping with natives if some of the plants have a distribution that's restricted to, say, San Diego or Riverside counties, like the Cleveland sage that I mentioned a few minutes ago? Earlier, I mentioned the plant common yarrow, Achillea millefolium, which you can see pictured on the right. Yarrow is a herbaceous perennial that's widely grown as an ornamental in California landscapes, attracts a variety of beneficial insects, so it's often used in beneficial insect hedgerows. It makes a good cut flower, and its ethnobotanical uses include using it to stop the flow of blood from wounds because it has anticoagulant properties. As you can see from the distribution map below, which comes from the website Plants of the World Online, yarrow has a really broad distribution across the Northern Hemisphere that includes California and beyond to Eurasia and Europe, including England, which is where I grew up. And here's England right there, or more precisely, there's the United Kingdom. Anyway, if I go visit my family in England and then bring back to California with me seeds of common yarrow from England, with the appropriate legal phytosanitary paperwork, of course, are the plants I then grow in California from those English seeds considered to be California natives? And here's another question. Why might this be important? So have a think about these questions. I've written the questions in Canvas as well, in case you forget what they are, and we're going to discuss them in another unit and in some of our labs. Here's another similar question. The small tree or large shrub California buckeye, Aesculus californica, has a wide range from southwestern Oregon through many parts of California, including Santa Cruz County, and it also occurs at lower elevations up near Lake Tahoe. If I go up to Tahoe, collect buckeye seeds and bring them back to Santa Cruz, would the resulting plants grown from those seeds be considered locally native to Santa Cruz? These questions are ones which come up frequently in native plant circles, and as I said earlier, we'll discuss them further in our labs. Finally, here's one last question for you to ponder on. Can hybrid plants be considered native? Species of some native plants hybridize naturally where their populations intersect in the wild. An example in Santa Cruz County is coast buckwheat, Eriogonum latifolium, pictured on the right here, which is mainly found on the immediate coast. But it can hybridize with its more inland, close relative, naked buckwheat, Eriogonum nudum, in locations where their populations intersect. Some closely related plants that wouldn't normally meet in the wild will hybridize when they're introduced to each other through human intervention, either naturally, by being planted together in a garden setting, for example, or by deliberate hybridization by a plant breeder. An example of a hybrid native plant that was discovered in a garden setting by Roger Raish in 1989 at the UC Berkeley Botanic Garden is Salvia bee's bliss, which you can see planted at Cabrillo in the Horticulture Department student parking lot median strip and at the bottom of the hill leading up to the Hort Department. Salvia bee's bliss is thought to be a hybrid between Salvia sonamensis and either Salvia leucophylla or Salvia clevelandii. Examples of native plants which have been deliberately hybridized are the jellybean series of monkeyflower, Diplacus aurantiacus, which were bred by local plant breeder, the late Rich Persoff. On the right, the largest photo shows the flowers of the naturally occurring form of sticky monkeyflower, although in reality the flower color is a little more golden orange than it looks in this photo. The smaller photos show 4 of the jellybean hybrids. The goals of the breeding program were to produce plants that are more compact, more floriferous, more colorful, and have a longer blooming season. My question to you is, can these hybrids truly be described as being native? So again, we'll come back to these questions in our labs. So in conclusion, one of the goals of this unit was to define a California native plant, but you can see that it isn't quite as straightforward as it might appear. In general, a California native plant is one which grew in what we now call California prior to 1542. In practice, though, you may need to apply a narrower, more localized, more specific definition of native. And, of course, apply all the usual considerations of plant selection at your particular location, such as what's the soil type, what's the sun or shade, what's the wind like, is it close to the ocean, etc. And we'll talk about all of these later in the semester. So let's do a quick summary of what's been covered in this unit. In the Americas, a native plant is defined as one which grew here naturally before European intervention. And in California, this is considered to be any plant growing here before the arrival of the Spaniard Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo in 1542. A floristic province is a biogeographic region with a relatively uniform composition of plants. The state of California includes 3 floristic provinces: the California Floristic Province, which covers 70% of the state, the Great Basin Floristic Province, and the Desert Floristic Province. The geographic distribution or range of a plant describes the area or regions in which a plant grows or grew natively. The geographic distribution varies between species. Some species can have a broad distribution across perhaps more than one continent, while some may have a very, very narrow, very restricted distribution. Plants that are native to just one region are said to be endemic to that region. Questions that are being left open for discussion in future units are, is a hybrid plant a native? And is a native plant that was grown from seed or cuttings originating from a different area considered locally native? Thanks for listening. Go back to Canvas now. Read the small amount of text that's left on the page for this unit, and there's also a short quiz for you to take to test your knowledge of the content of this video lecture.